Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see you. Come closer. Come closer. I like when we get closer. Hi. John O'Keefe, present, accounted for here in my room again because quiet has come back to my house. And I just wanted to say hello to you, to me, to everybody, and this beautiful celebration of reading time. Reading time, right? So let's talk about Gregor the Overlander. Man, what an adventure. We closed yesterday with two spinners showing up at the end of a dark, stanky tunnel that Ripred had just run the questers through, right? In order so that the rats' armies would not figure out where they were from. Oh, how exciting. Oh my gosh. And then, of course, one of them says, if I could send us rats destroyed our space. And then one dies, right? So there's one spinner left, and that's where we left off yesterday. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's dip into chapter 21 and 22, maybe 23, but probably just 21 and 22, because that's about how much time I like to read, because after that period of time, I stop paying attention. Brain starts wanting to go outside, maybe going and riding on my motorcycle, maybe talking to my family, maybe wondering how you're doing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got to get on with it. Miss Rainey is always kind of waiting for that as well. But the reality is that we are in chapter 21. And the very last lines, as you know, I always like to go back and make sure that I touch base with the last paragraph, or at least the last couple from yesterday's reading. So yesterday ended. Gosh, man, it's been a long day. Taught a lot, had a lot of meetings, did grown-up stuff today. Thinking about a whole bunch of you out there. By the way, I do want to interrupt for one more second and just say that I have been in contact with the original reader in my life of Gregor the Overlander series, Miss Samantha B. And I want to let Samantha B know how excited I am to be making contact. Young lady was a student in 4th grade a few years ago. Let's just say that, right? And this was her book that changed her life. This is the book that made her more of a reader than she ever was beforehand. And I just got lucky enough to be in the same room with her that year when she fell in love with this. I remember when she finished the first book. I remember when she finished the second book. I remember when she finished the third book. I remember when tears came down in her eyes, somewhere between book 3 and book 5 of this series, because she told me, without me really knowing what was going on, of another one of the 4 deaths. So I will tell you that I have this knowledge down the road of what's up, but I'm not going to tell you that. I was talking about it yesterday with myself and just being amazed that I have that inside information. But if this spider is a part of the quest, that means 1 of the 4 are dead. That means 8 will still survive. Chapter 21, paragraphs just before it. A large orange spider with a small brown spider on its back staggered in and collapsed on the floor. The brown one was oozing a strange blue liquid. It made a great effort to sit up. Its front legs brushed its chest as it spoke. Ica sends us. Nars attacked webs. Many spinners lost. We join the quest. And with that, the brown spider fell over dead. Oh, man! We joined the quest. The 2 spinners are now a part of it. Check this out, chapter 21. Gregor looked at the spider in shock. In its final moments, it had rolled onto its back and curled up its legs. Blue liquid seeped out of a wound in its belly, staining the stone floor. So we're all here, said Gregor softly. What do you mean? Asked Henry. Gregor pulled the prophecy from his pocket. Sandwich was right. We're all together. At least we were for a few seconds, he read aloud. 2 over, 2 under, of royal descent, 2 flyers, 2 crawlers, 2 spinners ascent, 1 gnar beside and 1 lost up ahead. He couldn't bring himself to say the next line, but Ripred could. and 8 will be left when we count up the dead. Well, 1 down and there to go, 3 to go, and Ripred poking the spider with the end of his tail. Stop it, said Gregor. Oh, what? We can't pretend that any of us was very attached to the spinner. We don't even know its name, except maybe you, Ripred said to the orange spider. Remember, just in case we have newbies showing up, Ripred is the rat, the gnar who has come in. Thanks for whoever put that thumb up. Whoever that is, I'm loving you right now. But then again, I'm not really quite sure who's out there. So come on, bring it on. Anyway, let's keep going. It doesn't matter who's here and who's not. We are present. Stop it, said Gregor. Treflix, said the orange spider. I am she called Gox. Well, Gox, I suppose you're hungry after your journey, but our food is limited. None of us will think less of you if you'd like to dine on Treflix, said Ripred. I guess they would do that, wouldn't they, in real life? She's not going to. Oh, man, said Gregor. Spiders are neither squeamish nor sentimental, said Ripred. Thank goodness for that. Gregor turned away, so neither he nor Boots had to watch the cannibalism. Pause. You do understand the word cannibalism, don't you? Let's talk about it. Well, Treflix was dead, and Gox was hungry. And Ripred offered Treflix to Gox, and Gox had no problem eating one of her own kind. Cannibalism is the act of eating one's own kind. Something that is not an okay thing to do for many of us, right? But in this case, actually, the dead one is probably the best one to be eaten because the other ones are still alive. Anyway, Gox immediately began to pump juice into Treflix. She's not going to... Oh, man, Gregor said again. Spiders are neither squeamish nor sentimental. Gregor turned away, so neither he nor Boots had to watch the cannibalism. He was glad to see that Henry and Luxa looked a little green as well. Look, if anything happens to me or Boots, don't let that spinner drink us. Toss us off the cliff, in a river, anything, okay? He said. They both nodded. You'll return the same favor for us? Said Luxa wanly. And our bats? And tick and temp too, I promise, said Gregor. He could hear the slow sucking sounds as Gox drained Treflix's body. Ugh, jeez, he added. Pause for a minute. You notice that I've been struggling? I've been skipping around a little bit. I'm having a hard time with my eyeballs. I just need more light. If you're trying to read in too little light, it's not good. So give me a second. Let me take care of that business, give myself a little bit more light so the words can actually show up. This light is just for show because it's actually just in here. It hasn't been plugged in. Why? Because it's supposed to be somewhere else, goofball. Okay, anyway, let's get back to the book, okay? Because I'm kind of into this whole idea that Treflix is being eaten by Gox and Gregor is being sick. Fortunately, it didn't take long for Gox to eat. Ripred began to grill her about the rat attack. She told him an entire army, several hundred rats at least, had invaded the land of spiders. The spiders had held them off, but many had died on both sides before rats had finally retreated. Vicus had come after the carnage and had sent Gox and Treflix on his back to the tunnel entrance. Why? Asked Gox. Why do the gnars kill us? I don't know. It may be that King Gorger has launched a total underland attack, or it may be that they caught wind of the 2 overlanders headed toward our land. Did they mention the warrior of the prophecy of Grey? Asked Ripred. There were no words, only death, said Gox. It's quite fortunate you found us. It would have taken much time to free 2 spinners from King Gorger's prisons unnoticed, and we have no time to waste, said Ripred to Gox. He turned to Gregor. This attack on the spinners does not bode well for your father. Why? What? Why not? Asked Gregor, feeling his insides go icy. Vicus has done a remarkable job of concealing you. No rat save me has seen you and lived to tell of it. The rats do not know the warrior has arrived, but the fact that humans have brought overlanders to the spinners will make them suspicious, said Ripred. The wheels seem to be visibly turning in Rip Red's head. Still, there is much confusion and war, and no rat has identified you. We move on now. No one argued. They packed up and headed out the far side of the cavern into a drier, roomier, less smelly tunnel. Aurora and Ares were able to fly now, although the space was dangerous for riders. We shall go on foot, Luxa told Aurora. Even if you carry the rest of us, what will be done with the Gnar? Even if you carry the rest of us, what will be done with the Gnar? Gnar, Gnawer. It means Gnar, but we have a silent GN at the beginning. Gnar, like Gnar, gnawing on something. So a Gnar is a rat. Just making sure you understood. So the bats took to the air with the remaining packs. Gregor watched them enviously. Lucky I'm not a bat. I might just fly out of here and never look back. Aurora and Ares would never do that. They are bonded to myself and Henry, said Luxa. How does that work exactly? Asked Gregor. When a bat and a human bond, they swear to fight to the death for each other, said Luxa. Aurora would never leave me in danger, nor I for her. Does everybody have a bat? Asked Gregor, thinking it would be nice to know somebody was going to hang around to defend you in all places of your life. Oh no, some never find a bat to bond with. I became one with Aurora when I was quite young, but this is not common, said Luxa. How come you bonded so early? Asked Gregor. After my parents were killed, I went through a time where I never felt safe on the ground. I spent all my waking hours in the air on Aurora. That's why we fly so well together, she said simply. Vicus convinced the council to allow us to bond early. After that, I was not so afraid. Pause. I've got this connection. Now, it's not with an animal. I mean, I've got connections to animals, and I have connections to humans. I have bonds with those. But you know, I've got another bond gifted to me from a very special man, my dad. And my dad, years ago, far more years than many of you two have been alive, or many of you all have been alive. But I want to say that he gifted me with this motorcycle named Prudence. And I want you to know that I want you to understand very clearly that I've had a little thing that's been coming up about like 15 times, and I'm going to just kind of pause on that one. So the reality is that I have this motorcycle, and I have ridden this motorcycle around the United States, across the United States, diagonally across the United States, making a large swath, kind of like a backward Z to my family in Minnesota and back down to Georgia. So I guess it'd be more of a triangle. Me and Prudence have been riding for such a long time that I feel a little bit as though I, like Luxa and Aurora, have this connection. That is why I feel I have the joy of being able to ride so well. So thanks, Pop. Appreciate that. Now, back to the idea of bonding, the idea of connecting. Are you afraid now? Said Gregor. At times, she admitted, but it's no worse than if I were in regalia. You see, I tire of constant fear, so I made a decision. Every day when I wake, I tell myself that it will be my last. If you are not trying to hold on to time, you are not so afraid of losing time. Gregor thought that this was the single saddest thing anyone had ever said to him. He couldn't answer. And then, if you make it to bedtime, you feel the joy of cheating death out of one more day, she said. Do you see? I think so, said Gregor, mumbling. An awful thought began to strike him. Wasn't Luxa's strategy just an extreme form of his own rule? True, he did not think about dying every day, but he denied himself the luxury of thinking about the future, with or without his dad. If he hadn't fallen through the grate in his laundry room and discovered his dad was still alive in the Underland, if his dad had never come home, how long would he have gone on refusing to be happy? His whole life? Maybe, he thought. Maybe my whole life. Gregor hurried on with the conversation. So how do you actually bond with a bat? He asked. It's a single, simple ceremony. Many bats and humans gather, You stand face to face with your bat and say a vow, like so, said Luxa, extending her hand and reciting a poem. Aurora the Flyer, I bond to you. Our life and death are one, we two. In dark and flame, in war and strife, I save you as I save my life. And then your bat recites it back to you, but using your name. Then there's a feast, concluded Luxa. So what happens if one of you breaks the vow? Like if Aurora flew off and left you in danger, asked Gregor. Aurora would not, but if few vows have been ever broken, the punishment is severe. The one at fault is banished to live alone in the Underland, said Luxa, and no one lives long in the Underland alone. Fascinating, as your native rituals are. Do you think we might proceed in silence? Given that the entire rat nation is on the lookout for us, it might be prudent, said Ripred. Luxa and Gregor shut up. Gregor wished that they could talk more. Luxa acted differently when she wasn't with Henry. Friendlier, less arrogant. But Ripred was right about the noise. We must stay safe. Fortunately, Boots dozed off. For several hours, all they had heard were the light taps of the footsteps and the scraping sounds of Ripred's teeth on a bone he'd saved from lunch. Gregor felt consumed with new worries about his dad. From what Ripred had said, it seemed like the rats might kill him to keep Gregor from reaching him. But why? That wouldn't change the prophecy, would it? Sorry, but why? That wouldn't change the prophecy, would it? He guessed no one really knew. And what about that last stanza? He unrolled the prophecy and read it so many times, he began memorizing it without trying. The last who will die must decide where he stands. The fate of the light is contained in his hands. So bid him take care, bid him look where he leaps, as life may be death, and death life again reaps. He couldn't make heads or tails of it. All he could figure out was that whoever died fourth had a pretty big responsibility to the 8 who were still living. But how? What? Where? When? The final stanza of The Prophecy of Grey left out all the details that would have made it useful. Ripred kept them moving until everyone was stumbling with fatigue. He gave the order to stop in a cavern that at least had a dry floor and a spring with drinkable water. Gregor and Luxa passed around their dwindling food, which was disappearing much faster than he had anticipated. He tried to object when the roaches gave their food to Boots, thinking he would share his own. Let them feed her, said Ripred. A crawler can live a month with no food and with no water. And don't bother feeding Gox. Treflix will hold her for longer than our journey will last. What do you think about only having to eat like once a month or longer? Boy, you'd have a lot more time, wouldn't you? Wouldn't eat as much good food, though. Anyway, the cavern was cold. Gregor stripped off Boots's damp clothes and put on a fresh set. Something was wrong with her. She seemed too quiet, and her skin was clammy and cold. He curled up under the blanket with her, trying to warm her up. What would he do if she got sick? They needed to be home with his mom, who always knew just the combination of juice and medicine and pillows to make it all right. He tried to console himself with the idea that his dad could help when they found him. Everyone was so tired from their trek that they fell asleep immediately. Something woke Gregor from a heavy sleep. A sound? A movement? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that when he opened his eyes, Henry was standing over Ripred, ready to plunge his sword into the sleeping rat's back. What? Ripred's the leader. What's Henry doing? Is Henry thinking that he's just going to get himself lost? We must continue. Chapter 22. Gregor opened his mouth to scream. No! Just as Ripred's eyes flickered open. Henry was behind the rat. All Ripred could have seen was the expression on Gregor's face, but that was enough. In the split second Harry drove the blade down, Ripred flipped onto his back and slashed his terrible claws. The sword cut across the rat's chest as Ripred tore a deep gash along Henry's arm. About this time, Gregor's no had actually finally left his mouth, and his yell woke up the entire party. Rip Red rose on his hind legs, bleeding, furious, terrifying to see. Henry looked weak and small by comparison. He could barely lift his sword with his injured arm. Luxa and Aurora were instantly airborne. Ares flew straight for the rat. Now you know Ares is Henry's bat. But Gregor got there first. He sprang between Rip Red and Henry with his arms spread out. "Stop!" he cried. "Stop, Ares!" Unbelievably, everyone paused. Gregor guessed this was the first time any of them had ever seen someone try to come between a fighting rat and a human. Their second of hesitation gave him just enough time to blurt out, "Anybody who wants to kill anybody else has to go through me first." Not particularly poetic, but it did have the desired effect. No one wanted Gregor dead. Everyone knew the warrior was essential to the end of the quest. "Move, Overlander. The rat will kill us all," ordered Luxa, preparing to dive at Rip Red. "The rat was merely trying to sleep. Believe me, pup, if I wanted to kill you, we would have not been to this conversation," said Rip Red. "Do not waste your lies on us, Gnar," said Luxa. "Do you think we would believe your word over one of our own?" "It's true. He's telling the truth. He didn't start it. It was Henry," Gregor shouted. "He was trying to kill Rip Red in his sleep." Everyone turned to Henry, who spat back at them. "Yes, and he would be dead now if it weren't for the Overlander." Now there was confusion. Gregor could tell by the look on Luxa's face that she hadn't known about Henry's plan. She'd assumed Rip Red had attacked first. She didn't know what to do next. "Stop, Luxa, please," said Gregor. "We can't afford to lose any more questers here. We have to stick together." He made up the word questers on the spot, and it seemed like it fit. Luxa slowly descended to the ground, but stayed on Aurora's back. Ares hovered uncertainly in the air. Gregor wondered if the bat had known about Henry's plan. But if he had, why hadn't they attacked together from the air? It was so hard to tell what the bats were thinking. Gregor noticed that for the first time that Temp and Tick were literally standing over the sleeping Boots, shielding her from anything. Gox still perched in the makeshift web she built at bedtime. "It's over," Gregor said with authority. Gregor said with an authority he didn't know he possessed. I love this. So at this moment, Gregor freaks out and just claims it. It's over. And all of a sudden, he's like surprised by his own strength, right? Surprised by his own understanding. Gregor claims this moment. "Put down your sword, Henry. Rip Red, just sit down. It's over." Would they listen to him? Gregor didn't know, but he was determined to hold his ground. It was a long, tense moment. Then Rip Red lowered his lips back over his bared fangs and broke into a laugh. "I will say this for you, warrior. You do not lack boldness." Henry let his sword clatter to the ground, which was no big concession since Gregor saw he could barely hold it. "Or treachery," said Henry softly. Gregor narrowed his eyes at Henry. "You know, where I come from, we don't think much of someone who sneaks up and stabs a person in their sleep." "He's not a person. He's a rat," said Henry. "If you cannot make the distinction, you may surely count yourself among the dead." Gregor held Henry's cold gaze. He knew that later he would think of several tough things he should have said to Henry in this moment, but he couldn't think of any at this time. Instead, he turned to Luxa and said gruffly, "We'd better patch them up." They weren't much better at first aid than they were at cooking, but Luxa at least knew what ointment to use. Gox turned out to be the biggest help of all. She spun a special web and instructed them to press handfuls of the silky thread into the injury. In minutes, the bleeding on both Henry's arm and Rip Red's chest had stopped. While Gregor patted extra layers of silk onto Rip Red's matted fur, the rat muttered, "I suppose I ought to thank you." "Forget about it," said Gregor. "I only did it because I need you." He didn't want Rip Red thinking that they were friends or anything of that like. "Did you? I'm glad," said Rip Red. "I thought I detected in you a sense of fair play, most dangerous in an Underland boy." Gregor wished everybody would just shut up about what was dangerous to him in the Underland. The whole place was being a giant minefield. He ignored Rip Red's comments and continued to apply the spider webs. Behind him, he heard Luxa whisper to Henry, "Why do you not just tell us? To keep you safe, Henry whispered back. Safe, Gregor thought. Right. Even if he got back to the Overland, Gregor didn't think that he would ever feel safe again. You must not do this again, Henry, he heard Luxa say. You cannot take him alone. I could have, if the Overlander had not interfered, said Henry. No, the risk is too great. We may have need of him, said Luxa. Let the rat be. Is that an order, Your Highness? Asked Henry with a slight edge to his voice. If that's the only way you will ever heed my advice, then yes, it is an order, said Luxa earnestly. Hold your sword until we better understand our situation. You speak most exactly like the old fool Vicus, said Henry. No, I speak as myself, said Luxa, stung. And as one who wishes us both to survive this situation. The cousins realized their voices had risen to the point where everyone else could hear them, so they stopped talking. In the silence, Ripred resumed gnawing on the bone that he'd been carrying around. The scraping grated on Gregor's nerves. Do you think you could please stop? He asked. No, actually, I can't, said Ripred. Rats' teeth continue to grow our entire lives, which necessitates gnawing to keep them at a manageable length. If I didn't gnaw frequently, my lower teeth would soon grow through the top of my skull and puncture my brain and, alas, kill me. Glad I asked, said Gregor, slapping a last piece of web on Ripred and leaning back against the cavern wall. So, now what? Well, since obviously no one's going back to Dreamland, we may as well make tracks for your father, said Ripred, rising to his feet. Gregor went to get Boots. As soon as he touched her, he felt alarmed. Her face was burning like a furnace. Oh no, he said helplessly. Hey, Boots. Hey, little girl. He gently shook her shoulder. She whimpered something in her sleep but didn't wake up. Luxa, something's wrong. Boots is sick, he said. Luxa laid her hand on Boots's forehead. She's fevered. She has caught some pestilence from the land of rats. Pestilence. Gregor hoped that wasn't as serious as it sounded. Luxa dug through the vials Solivit had left with them and held up one uncertainly. I think this is for fever. Ripred took a sniff and wrinkled his nose. No, that kills pain. He buried his snout in the pack and rooted out a blue glass bottle. You need this one. Give her only a few drops. She cannot handle more at her size. Man, pause. Do you see the strength in having Ripred? Not only is he an old warrior, but he's got a heck of a good sniffer. So he can even tell what's good medicine by just sniffing. Man, that is a teammate. I know he's a rat, but I'm just telling you, he's still a teammate. Gregor was reluctant to give her any of the strange medicine, but Boots was so hot. He slipped a few drops between her lips and thought she swallowed it. He tried to lift up to put her in the pack, and she moaned in pain. He bit his lip. She can't ride with me. It hurts her. They laid Boots on a blanket on Temp's back. Gox spun a web to secure her down to the shell. Gregor felt sick with worry. And 8 will be left when we count up the dead. He couldn't lose Boots. He just couldn't. He had to get her home. He should have left her in Regalia. He should have never agreed to the quest. If anything happened to Boots, it would be his fault. The gloom of the tunnel soaked through his skin and into his veins. Pause. That's not true. The gloom of a tunnel cannot soak into your skin and into your veins. This is metaphoric. This is figurative, right? I mean, this is supposed to create feelings of with you, right? You're supposed to, it's all crawling around. You're in these places. You want to get out. You want to do that, but it's everywhere. It's all around you. The gloom of the tunnel soaked through his skin and into his veins. He wanted to scream out in pain, but the darkness choked him. He would have given almost anything for just one glimpse of the sun. The party limped along slowly, painfully, suspiciously, preoccupied by the worries that they all shared. But no one spoke aloud. Even Ripred, by far the most hardened of the group, seemed to hunch down under the weight of the situation. This general despair was just one of the reasons that they didn't detect the score of rats until they were almost on top of them. Even Ripred could not distinguish the smell of rats in a place reeking of rats. The bats couldn't sense them in the narrow tunnel as they approached the increasingly loud river. The humans could see nothing in the gloom. Ripred led them out of the tunnel and into a huge cavern divided by a deep canyon. A wide, powerful river ran through it. A swing bridge spanned the river. It must have been made with the combined efforts of several species in better times. Thick silk woven by the spiders supported thin slats of stone cut by the humans. They must have needed the bats' flying abilities to build such a bridge. A huge canyon, raging river. One single suspended bridge across, made by spiders and humans and bats together. When Gregor shone his flashlight up to see the bridge was secure, he caught sight of them. 20 rats sitting motionless on the rocks above the opening to the tunnel, right above their heads, waiting. "Run!" Ripred yelled and literally snapped his teeth at Gregor's heels. Gregor stumbled forward and toward the bridge and began to cross, his feet slipping on the worn stone slats. He could feel Ripred's hot breath on his neck. Henry and Luxa were flying ahead of him, jetting across the river. He was halfway across when he remembered Boots wasn't on his back. She had been with him so continually on the journey, he had begun to think of them as inseparable. But now she was on Temp. Gregor turned abruptly to go back. Ripred, as if anticipating just this move, spun Gregor forward and snagged for the backpack with his teeth. Gregor felt himself lifted into the air as Ripred ran flat out for the far side of the river. "Boots!" yelled Gregor. "Boots!" Ripred moved like lightning. And as he reached the opposite bank, he dumped Gregor on the ground and joined Luxa and Henry, who were fanatically trying to hack through the silk ropes supporting the bridge so the rats couldn't chase them. Gregor aimed the flashlight and saw that Gox was about 3/4 of the way across. Behind her, carrying his sister, Temp struggled along with Boots. Between Boots and the 20 killer rats that were now streaming across the bridge, there was only Tick. "Boots!" Gregor screamed and dove back for the bridge. Ripred's tail caught him again across the chest and flung him back onto the ground, knocking the wind from him. He gasped, trying to fill his lungs, then got to his knees and crawled toward the bridge. He had to help her. He had to. Got zipped off the bridge and began to snap threads with her jaw. "No!" coughed Gregor. "My sister!" He pulled up his feet just in time to catch another blow from Ripred's tail. The roaches were within 10 feet of the bank when the rats caught up with them. There was no discussion between them. It was as if the bugs had worked out this entire scenario long ago. Temp put on a burst of speed for the end of the bridge, and Tick turned to face down the army of rats alone. As they bounded at her, Tick flew directly into the face of the lead rat, causing it to startle back in surprise. Until that moment, Gregor hadn't even realized the roaches had wings. Maybe the rats didn't know either. But it didn't take them long to recover. The lead rat sprang forward and crushed Tick's head in its jaws. Temp collapsed on the bank just as the bridge gave away. 20 rats, the leader still holding Tick in its teeth, plunged into the river below. As if this sight wasn't horrific enough, the water churned as enormous piranha-like fish surfaced and fed on the screaming rats. In a minute, it was all over. The water ran smoothly, the rats had vanished, and Tick was gone forever. Oh. A spider's gone. Tick, the protector, is gone. I'm almost sad about a cockroach dying. It's been 33 minutes. They've made it safely and dangerously and dramatically across the river. Now we know that in the river, it probably wasn't a good idea for Gregor to try to sneak out, right? I mean, if those fish eat everything, piranha-like, come on, man. The Underland is not a place for everybody to go, right? Got to be a bit of a warrior. Boots is sick. Luxa is growing up a bit. Henry has seemed to kind of turn. Ripred has saved Gregor 4 times now, maybe 5. The bats are doing all right now. We better come back tomorrow and read some more with me because I'm tired, a little hot. It's time to get into my t-shirt and some shorts, get outside and do some gardening, or get outside and, I don't know, maybe take a walk with my sweetheart. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in reading again today. Sometimes I know you don't want to. Sometimes I know there's better things that you might want to be able to do. But just like my friend David D in my classroom right now says, I just got to do it at 3, and then Mr. O doesn't call my parents. Well, at least that's the deal that we've hooked up, right? So anyway, anybody and wherever you're at in regards to your reading, each and every day matters. Every day is another day that you get a chance to try, just to do it a little bit differently than you've ever done it before. Gregor is uncertain about why he's there, but he does know one thing. He's on his way to finding his dad, and that's huge. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, come back tomorrow, continue the sweet, sweet adventure of Gregor the Overlander in the Underland upon his quest to seek his dad. I love you. Do your best. Live lots, and I'll talk to you soon.